All right, everyone. It is now 11 o'clock. I'd like to thank you all for coming to our reschedule of the webinar as well as the time change. Appreciate it very much. And I am Aaron Blumberg, Swiftland's Continuing Education Coordinator, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Swiftland's Diversity Discovery Institute Year 2 webinar, E is for Evaluating with Dieta Jones. For over 20 years, Dieta Jones has guided people and organizations through the process of fundamental transformation. She has been a leading voice in shaping contemporary thinking and practice around integrated and sustainable approaches for workplace culture, diversity, and inclusion. Her years of experience as a management consultant, diversity and inclusion educator, organization development and training professional have led to her being one of the most sought-after speakers and consultants in the library community. Please welcome Dieta and enjoy her webinar this morning. Dieta?
Good morning. Thank you, Aaron, for that introduction. Thank you for the folks who are on the call for joining us today. We rescheduled, and so I know it's a little tricky with people having to move things around on our already full calendar, so I really appreciate that you were able to make time. I have to tell you that this is a topic that I'm really excited to be working with you on. It's not the easiest topic in the diversity wheel, but it's one that requires a lot of thinking and ideas about how it is that we can really address how we evaluate our diversity efforts. So one of the things that I'd like to ask right at the outset is that if you have comments, questions, or ideas to share, things that you've been doing at your own institution to evaluate the effectiveness of your diversity efforts, or suggestions or resources, that you share those. I am not the originally scheduled speaker on this topic, and so I know that there was mention in the description about a particular tool that was going to be introduced. I do not know what that particular tool was, and so what I am going to do is try to hopefully walk you through a variety of different frameworks and questions and ways of thinking about evaluation based on what it is that you're trying to learn and what it is that you're trying to do. But I really look to you, everyone who is here today, to bring your insights and expertise as well, because I think that will make this a much more rich exchange. So please chime in at any point, and I'll make sure that we stop and address your comments. So let's talk a little bit about evaluation. The big question initially, of course, is what is it that you're trying to evaluate? What I tried to do was think about the areas of evaluation that most typically come up related to diversity. If you have other areas that I missed that come to your mind, please let me know. These are the ones that are most typically the areas that I'm asked to help people think through, or that I've worked with people and organizations on over the course of my career, inside and outside of the library community. There are some other areas, other types of organizational structures that typically do not exist in libraries that I also have done some work around, but I'm assuming that things like employee resource groups are probably not applicable in your library. If they are, then bring that up and we can talk about those as well. So the couple of things that come to mind, or the 6 things that come to mind for me, are recruitment and retention, progress. How are we doing related to those 2 items? Traditionally speaking, these are the 2 items that we've cared a lot about related to diversity efforts in the library community. We'll start off by talking a little bit about that. I have to tell you that I have mixed feelings about recruitment and retention and how we evaluate it. So let's talk about that along the way. Diversity training and training programs like this one, like this webinar or this series of webinars, and in-person events or things that happen perhaps as a comprehensive program. And I have a model that might be useful for us to think about there. Diversity programs and services, collection development practices, strategic plans related specifically to diversity. So either a diversity strategic plan or goals in your library strategic plan that specifically address diversity endeavors. And then organizational culture and climate, which absolutely is related to diversity, as well as many other areas of organizational health and well-being. Anything that I missed there? Okay, I'll keep chiming along, but please jump on in if you have anything. So, I didn't do this on purpose. Look at me. I'm so creative, and sometimes I don't even realize it. So this slide is really about kind of the process of thinking through how it is that we go about evaluation. I like to think about evaluation starting with the fact that most of the time what we're evaluating is either a project or some particular set of circumstances, or some kind of a program, something that has a container around it. And usually that starts by having some kind of a mess, something that happens that we see that there's an absence related to something that we can or should have related to diversity, or we have an idea about something that we can or should be doing, related to a service or a program, for example. Whether it's signage or different kinds of outreach programs, different kinds of services that we might offer to our user communities. Then what we do is we use that to define a problem or a goal. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? We gather data and brainstorm. We do some analysis and make some choices. This gathering data and analysis, these analysis pieces are the most important because they allow us to get information about our user community or communities that is really going to inform how we go about our evaluation process, how we go about setting ourselves up to be successful in providing services or resources or programs that are really meeting the needs of those communities or those constituents. Now, this is the piece where it takes a lot of work on our part because it's more than us just assuming that we have knowledge about what their needs and interests are, but that we actually are going out and doing our due diligence as far as listening. And we, for many years in the library community at this point, have been really rigorous as far as our outreach efforts and designing new ways of listening to users and programs and modules that really teach us how to take a more kind of anthropological approach to listening to users and really starting with how it is that we understand what their needs and interests are. Once we do a lot of work in that area, then we go on to implementation, and then we do evaluation. But evaluation is sitting just as close to find a mess or idea as it is to implementation on purpose, because I think it's really important that we have some idea about how we're going to evaluate and what our success criteria are very, very early on, so that we can really design a program or a service or articulate a goal that allows us to be able to really measure our success early in the process. So this is just a little model that I use when I talk through the process of evaluating and then using that to define programs or services that really reinforces how important it is that there's a whole process that we're taking into consideration here. Trina, I agree with you. Library services, absolutely. So programs and services was one of the areas that I mentioned, but you're absolutely right. That we need to make sure that all of those things take into consideration diversity evaluation. And so it's important for us to apply a simple analytical framework to all of our efforts. The 4 questions that come to my mind: what are the desired outcomes and success criteria you identified during the planning stages? So back to the model that I showed before, the desired outcomes and success criteria need to be articulated very, very early on in any project. And I think of our diversity efforts as something that we could put into a project management framework so that we're thinking about our desired outcomes and success criteria as early on. And I'm going to separate desired outcomes from success criteria so that we understand that sometimes our desired outcomes are very qualitative, like enriching our understanding of a particular user community, or strengthening the library's relationship, or strengthening the user community's awareness of services or programs that we offer. And success criteria also being things that would have qualitative and quantitative metrics associated with it, that we are able to think about both of those in ways that are very measurable. How well did the strategy succeed when evaluated against those outcomes and criteria, underscoring the need to really be clear about how we will go about evaluating before we develop the programs? Are there areas for improvement and enhancement? This third question is really about building organizational capacity. Any evaluation effort should take into consideration the fact that we are going to want to do something again in the future, that we will want to either build upon what it is that we've already done, stop doing it because it didn't give us the return on investment that we expected, or it wasn't on target, or make adjustments and do something that is slightly different or revised in the future. And then what did you learn that could apply to subsequent strategies and initiatives that are diversity related or not? Right? Again, these are about building organizational capacity, because any evaluation effort should allow us to learn in a way that has an impact on the whole organization, not just on the particular effort that we're studying at that point. So these are just at a high level some of the questions to take into consideration. So let's dive into the 6 areas that I identified as we got started. The recruitment and retention. I'll start with recruitment and retention. When I first came into the library community, I was the director of diversity programs at the Association of Research Libraries. And I spent a lot of time traveling around from library to library, all around the North America, actually. And a lot of times what people wanted were ideas about how to enhance their diversity efforts. How to think about what their diversity goals should be, how to bring diversity programs and services to their organization, and how to evaluate the effectiveness of their diversity efforts. And one of the things that I've found, and something that unfortunately continues to be the case even to this day, is that we put a disproportionate amount of energy on recruitment and retention. Now, I'm not saying that recruitment and retention aren't important. They're terribly important. The tricky part is that the numbers alone don't really tell the full story. That it is my experience that recruitment and retention typically kind of balance each other out. And it's because we have this cycle that we get into organizationally that is kind of knee-jerk reaction. So in many of our organizations, instead of having robust kind of diversity strategies or plans, we typically instead take on diversity efforts or initiatives because some crisis has happened. There's something out there in the external environment that has triggered us to feel like we need to respond. And so we take action and we hire someone, or we appoint someone, we give somebody an additional hat. So we give somebody diversity librarian / reference librarian, or diversity librarian / outreach librarian. Or, we appoint somebody a diversity committee chair, or we begin a diversity committee, or we'll start a peer information counseling program. And we do these in an effort to bring people into our organization who can do, and I'm using air quotes here, do diversity for us, hoping that recruitment will really have a positive impact on our organizational awareness and culture, and also be our official response to whatever the initial crisis was. What almost always happens is that it leads us to a sense of disappointment, because that one person or that committee or that specific initiative aren't able to solve all of the diversity challenges or fulfill all of the diversity initiatives that we aspire to fulfill on their own. And we don't really take diversity as something that is integral to the whole organization. And so we end up balancing out we end up losing oftentimes either the star person who has come in to fill a particular diversity slot through a recruitment effort, or some of our diversity committees or other kinds of programs end up getting disbanded because of funding or some other reason, because we've lost energy or because there's some other strategic priority. And so it is my experience that recruitment and retention oftentimes balance each other out. So it's really important to think about letting the numbers, or not letting the numbers alone, the number of people only representing a variety of different backgrounds, be the measure of success related to diversity and inclusion. It's absolutely critical that we have representation of diverse perspective, voices, cultures, experiences, language skills, etc., disciplines that inform our organizations, but it's really tricky to let the numbers alone speak for us. The other things that are really important to keep in mind are that we need to make sure that our recruitment and retention goals are, and this is the first bullet point, are really tied to our organizational strategy and structure. That we can't have a diversity recruitment effort that is not taking into consideration the bigger picture of where our organizational strategy is going. If you anticipate changes to the organizational structure in the future, then it's really important to think about how some of those new positions potentially, some of the reconfigured teams or committees might actually allow for more diverse participation, might allow you to do some new training and development of people who are already on staff and may not have had opportunities to play the kind of leadership role, for example, that they may have the potential for playing. One of the ways that we have seen this happen and also been able to measure this is through libraries that, because of some restructuring efforts and reconfiguration of some of their teams and committees, have put people in paraprofessional positions as leaders of teams and task forces and committees that traditionally in their particular organization have not had the opportunity to lead in that way. And that has counted very affirmatively towards their recruitment and retention goals, because it's been a way to advance people and really do some professional and career development for people who are oftentimes local, from underrepresented groups, have a lot of potential, but not necessarily people who hold an MLIS. So really thinking about using recruitment and retention creatively and thinking about what your current workforce is and how it is that you might tap in differently to the demographic changes and needs that you're trying to fill. The other thing that has come up quite a lot over the years, and that I've even had a lot of conversations about recently, is about the need to make sure that search committees really are on board. It's very, very difficult to evaluate recruitment and retention efforts and hold yourself accountable for numerical gains if on the other end of or on the front end of the process, you have search committees who don't understand or aren't on the same page about the diversity goals that your library is aspiring towards. So making sure that search committees understand how important it is to think about diversity, what diversity means, what the values are that are reflective of the library's mission, and what that means as far as interpreting qualifications for new positions. That's actually not as easy as it sounds. A lot of times, we in our organizations don't take the time to redefine job descriptions or position descriptions, to really think creatively about how it is that we're advertising and where we're advertising, and to make sure that our search committee members understand that qualified applicants may look quite different than the people who recently left the position. Do any of you have recruitment or retention strategies that you use in your institution that are really wonderful to share with us? So the tricky part about that one is just make sure that the numbers alone aren't your sole metric, that of course you want to measure, of course you want to keep track, but you don't want the numbers alone to be the only goal that is important to you. And a lot of us have organizations where we have a parent organization that is expecting us to be held accountable to some recruitment and retention goals. That makes absolute sense, but there's a lot more that has to feed into those recruitment and retention goals that has to do with building organizational capacity and thinking about the overall organizational strategy. When it comes to training, which is another area, so I'm going to move on to diversity training. Another area where we like to do evaluation is training. And what I'd like to do is share just a quick high-level model that comes from the work of a man named Donald Kirkpatrick. This is from the 50s. It's quite an old model, but it's been adapted and expanded upon over the years. And a lot of large corporate entities use this model, but they've added on levels 5 and 6 even, that focus much more heavily on what I'll call return on investment and numerical, like profit gains. I didn't bother adding those for us because we don't focus nearly as much on profit, and diversity training is driving our bottom line. But the essence of this evaluation module is really helpful to think about. So there are 4 levels. Level 1 is related to kind of the reaction, satisfaction, and planned actions of the participants based on their experience in a diversity training. Level 2 is what they learned, again, what participants learned. Level 3 is the application and behavioral transfer. And then level 4 is organizational results. And that's where I think we get back to building organizational capacity for us. So it basically, in essence, translates to these 4 questions, those 4 levels of evaluation. How satisfied are participants with the course? And what are their intended uses of the knowledge gained? Now, these are the typical kinds of questions that I think are most often answered at this level, right? Do participants believe they learned the knowledge and values that the course was intended to teach, is the second level. Can participants demonstrate the values, knowledge, and skills taught in the course? This is level 3, and this is where I think our diversity training efforts could become a lot more effective potentially, or a lot more customized if we say that we're going to start designing and then offering diversity training experiences that lead us to level 3 evaluations, where participants are able to demonstrate values, knowledge, and skills taught in the course. This is most often done through pre and post tests, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, but this is where we start to have some of that return on investment idea that is much more about profits in the corporate world, but could really have some potential in our organizations as well. And then the level 4 evaluations, do participants report that they are using the values, knowledge, and skills learned in the course on the job? And I would even go ahead and add on to that, do their direct reports, for example, report that they are using the values, knowledge, and skills learned? So if I am a manager, are my direct reports able to affirmatively report that I am using the values, knowledge, and skills learned through my diversity training experiences as I coach and develop and mentor and make assignments for them? So let's talk through these a little bit as far as thinking about how this might play out. So some of the ways that you can go about level 1 evaluation, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on level 1 because it's something that's probably much more straightforward. Common methodology for this is surveys, doing a survey of people afterwards and asking people how they felt about the training. Do they feel like it, it was something that was useful for them? Did it meet their expectations? Asking people to point out content areas that they felt were missing from the training event. The advantage of this is that it allows for the designers and facilitators to make adjustments to the content because it asks people what worked, but also what didn't work, so that weaknesses could be used to enhance the design and development in the future. Tell the designers how engaged participant felt by the training event. Of course, you want to take into consideration the medium. So whether or not it's an online experience or an in-person experience, and then provide information about overall reaction as well as specific aspects of the training event. And so you can really break down the specific aspects of the training event so that if you want to talk, for example, about overall diversity awareness, that's one thing, or, ask people about culture general awareness building versus culture specific awareness building, asking people about their increased knowledge and understanding of things like implicit bias, explicit understanding of how it is that they themselves might become an ally or take on new ally responsibilities in their role as supervisors or managers. So you can really break down the elements of a training event through this level 1 evaluation. Level 2 is where you get into pre and post testing. This level 2, and so this diversity series that we're a part of, we use this, right, where we ask people to do some pre-testing. Tell us a little bit about how you approach diversity, how you thought about it, how you defined it, some of the choices that you made around diversity, some of the context that you bring, the lenses that you bring to diversity before beginning these sessions, and then a little bit of post-testing afterwards, not per session necessarily, but at the end of the overall diversity series. This is a way to really get to knowledge. Is knowledge being gained? This is a bit more rigorous, and this is what is oftentimes expected more, especially from granting agencies. So this is a really wonderful opportunity, but you have to think about this in advance so that you can build in the pretest. And you also want to think about how it is that you can demonstrate understanding of knowledge or the acquisition of knowledge. Level 3 evaluation is taking the transfer of knowledge, skills, and attitudes from the training context to the workplace. This is where I think there's a lot of opportunity for all of us, because this is where we really start to have an organizational impact. Absolutely, we want people at personal levels to grow and to develop and to benefit from exposure to diversity training and concepts. But what we really, really want is for people to be more effective in their leadership roles. And I say leadership with a small L, meaning all of us as leaders, all of us as agents, all of us as the face of the library. We want all of us to be more effective in our roles in the workplace, whether it's working with our internal constituents or with the external constituents. So taking the way that we can help facilitate this transfer of learning is by letting the training or the learning environment be as similar as possible to the actual work environment. So examples of that would be where we give people case studies, for example, or we put people in their real work environments and have them with their world work colleagues and have them do some role playing or some scenarios where they're playing out a real experience that they've struggled with or been confronted with in the past. Make sure that people understand the general principles behind the training or behind the behaviors. And that goes back to some of the culture general awareness that we talked about before. And then think about how to, apply some of the specific skills and abilities to future on-the-job behaviors. The other thing that's really important is to help people make sure that they understand that the specific knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are being transferred from the diversity training are also aligned with the overall organizational values and strategy. Do any of you already do this deep level of evaluation in your organizations? And if so, how do you do it? Where does it play itself out? Okay. Well, there's one more. Sorry, I'm going to the next one. So some of the factors that can help the library, that the library can put in place to make sure that these deeper levels of evaluation are really meaningful and authentic is by making sure that there's an organizational culture and climate that supports change. So one of the things that oftentimes happens is that we think about diversity efforts and programs and initiatives as a set of, checklists, things on a checklist, and we put evaluation metrics in place, and we measure our success against those metrics, but we don't necessarily take into consideration the context, the organizational context. If the organizational context does not support change, then it's very difficult for you to have satisfying evaluation data that allows you to really feel like you're having breakthrough experiences based on your efforts. So I'm saying this because real diversity efforts that are going to have substantive impact on your organizational culture and climate and behaviors and impact on your services and programs have to be integral to your overall organizational culture and strategy. And so they have to be something that are understood and supported by not just your senior level administrators, but by the whole organization, and supported, but also normed, as in normalized throughout the organization, so that new behaviors start to become the new norm that are consistent with the things that you're teaching in your diversity trainings, and that are consistent with the new patterns and behaviors that you really want to see as part of your organizational culture. Or else this level 3 evaluation is not necessarily useful. Okay, so the level 3 evaluation requires a certain context in order for it to be really substantive and useful for you. The other thing is that it's really helpful from an evaluation point of view if you have participants, direct supervisors, or others in the organizations, like mentors, for example, work and facilitate participants through the new behaviors. So giving people feedback on the new behaviors, understanding what the new behavioral expectations are, and then giving them feedback outside of the training experience and in the real work experience that reinforces that new behavioral expectation. And what that does is it gives them the opportunity to practice, and then also to start to internalize and normalize that new behavior. So, I know pay increases is one of the items mentioned here. That actually does occur in some places, not necessarily in our libraries. But a lot of the other things that are associated here, such as help, encouragement, praise, increased freedom and responsibility and recognition, are all things that we, all of us in our organization have the ability to give either to our colleagues or to people who we supervise. That helps to really internalize the new training behaviors. The other thing that we need to do is make sure that our evaluation is taking into consideration the intrinsic reinforcement from implying his or her new knowledge, skills, and attitudes. That is kind of motivation theory 101, right? So people need to see the new skill or behavior as something that they are able to take on and that they enjoy doing. And so this is a place where really that coaching and mentoring infrastructure in the organization needs to be in place. And I don't mean infrastructure as in you need to create a whole mentoring program necessarily, but that the training, if you're going to do diversity training and really expect it to have a transformational impact on your organization, that it needs to be supported by managers and mentors, formal and or informal, who really understand and can help to process and internalize some of those new behaviors. Are any of you doing this already? Do you have mentoring programs? Do you have robust managerial or coaching programs that take into consideration building capacity for new skills and attitudes related to diversity and or other kinds of competencies? So some of the ways that this happens in some organizations is where a level 3 evaluation may be something like asking people to talk about how it is that they, in a training experience, have experience with a particular concept, right? A particular concept where we might be learning about interacting more with the Latino communities that we serve and the diversity within the Latino communities, that there's many, many different definitions of Latino and a lot of different people who identify under this very large umbrella. And that one of our next learning steps after the training experience and the expectations, behavioral expectations, is to go out and to gather some first-person experiences from different Latino communities and ask people, and I'm thinking especially since you're in Florida and there's such a strong Latino presence in the state of Florida, that you may say, go out and have experiences with at least 2, maybe 3 different communities. And it can be, from a variety of different backgrounds. And then come back into the workplace and be able to think about how it is that the new perspective that you gained, the ahas, the insight, the awareness, could actually inform the way that we go about our work as we think about designing programs or services where we're specifically trying to reach out to the Latino population, right? In other experiences, I'll give you an example. In one organization that I worked with, one of the outcomes was that they realized that the most that they had ever done was create their signage in Spanish and English, but that they definitely were not recognizing the fact that people who identify or are identified by the Census Bureau and others as Latino come from so many different backgrounds, that it's really important that we start to think much more expansively and start to think about how it is that we reach out to people who are from Cuba or from Puerto Rico or from Mexico or all of the different varieties of places, from Peru, and that people in Peru don't eat tacos, right? That it's not that there's so many different ways in which we might think about multicultural awareness and education, so that as we do our programs in the future and we design our programs, we need to think much more expansively about that. And being asked to think about how a training experience that gives you a little bit of insight can then be coupled with some additional work that is incentivizing and intrinsically rewarding to the individual to pursue and expand their own knowledge and then apply it back in their workplace to the approaches that we might take to developing programs or services or even cultural festivities and events that will be open to our communities. That's the level 3 kind of evaluation. It's not necessarily as quick. It oftentimes takes a little bit more time to give people an opportunity to do some of the processing and reflecting back, but it's much more deep, and it actually has an impact on the organization over time beyond just level 1 or level 2. The next layer, the last of the 4 layers in this diversity training evaluation, is level 4. And level 4 is really useful if you want to really think about how you assess organizational impact. The couple of things to think about if you decide to use level 4 evaluation: use a control group if practical. So some kind of whatever the experimental design is that's feasible. This is not something that is easy to be done, but it does definitely give you some sense of how far you could go if you really want to have a sense of how much people are learning and able to bring back new knowledge and skills into the organization. So you have a certain group of people who are going through an experience. I'll give you an example. Right now at the University of Illinois in Chicago, they have a self-identified group of people who are going through diversity dialogue experiences. And what this diversity dialogue experience, this is not unique to the University of Illinois, but it's the way that they've configured it is actually really wonderful because it's specifically in the library, which is not as widespread. So these folks in the library representing MLS and non-MLS staff are coming together periodically over the course of a 6-month period of time and having deep diversity-related dialogues that are facilitated by professional dialogue facilitators who have deep knowledge and skill related to diversity, but also the tool of dialogue, which is really about exploring, understanding, and coming to a place where we can really appreciate other people's point of view in a much more robust way and in a way that allows us to start to be able to evolve organizationally. This has become a control group, right? So this control group over time is able to share with the rest of the organization some of the experiences that they've had personally and now collectively that have allowed them to really open up their possibilities in the way that they think about diversity, and the way they think about working with their colleagues, the way they think about working across some of the class kinds of lines that oftentimes present themselves in libraries, MLS, non-MLS kind of class lines that oftentimes are kind of contentious issues as we think about diversity from an organizational culture point of view, as well as thinking about new ways of having an impact on campus. So that dialogue group has become a control group, and then they give guidance and input and ideas to the rest of the organization about what the possibilities are, and they've really become quite a model for the rest of the organization. For this to really work, number 2, you need to allow time for results to be achieved. So as I mentioned, this dialogue group, the example that I just gave, has been going on went on for 6 months, and it took them meeting time after time after time. They didn't have immediate short-term results, but they built to a place where they're really starting to have very, very significant organizational impact, and they're an advisory group to the Library Standing Diversity Committee, for example. Measure both before and after the program, if possible and practical. Not just because it will inform you, but it will also be a really wonderful way to get ongoing support to the extent that you want to expand and or repeat the experiences. By the way, these kinds of dialogue groups are also possible to happen where the library sponsors something like this for the community, especially as through an outreach effort, for example. And so this is something that doesn't just have to be an internal experience. It could be that the library is in a facilitating role with members of the community or representatives of different groups within the community as a way to strengthen relationships between the library and different communities. And then consider the cost versus the benefit. That it's very sometimes it's prohibitive to think about level 4 evaluation because of the time commitment that's needed. But if what you really want is deep organizational change, then the possibilities are endless here. Comments, questions about the diversity training evaluation or anything else here? Any other approaches that you take to evaluating? I would say that the really popular, the most popular and common approaches are level 1 and level 2. I would encourage you, and I'll go back to level 2, I would encourage you that if you can choose between level 1 and level 2, go with level 2. Level 2 is more substantive. There's more possibility for getting resources and support, not just internal, but also external. Even granting agencies will at least expect this level of evaluation. And the really important thing about level 2 evaluation is that you know in advance that you're going to take this path as you're designing your process or initiative, so that your training event, so that you can make sure to do the pretest. But this one is much more able to be resourced than level 1 only, which is more satisfaction driven. So diversity programs and services, and this is where the guidance that I would give related to diversity programs and services is making sure that in preparation for setting these up, you ask yourself the key questions, and then you measure yourself against them. Who is your target audience, and really being very clear about who your target audience is. So when you're thinking about things like bibliographic training or reference assistance, that you're really thinking about who is your target audience. Is your target audience the staff who you're preparing to design materials, or is it the actual participants who are going to be the students, for example, who are going to be part of your target audience in the classroom setting? Making sure that you're thinking about who your target audience is and what you want to equip them with. You also want to make sure that you are building in a mechanism to make sure that you have, to the extent possible, some specific demographic information about the secondary users. What do you know about these people, right? What do you know about their backgrounds, their experiences, their expectations? To the extent that you can get some data in advance, it's helpful. In what ways does this program or service respond to their needs? And this is terribly important, especially if you're evaluating the effectiveness of a program or service, because it will allow you to hopefully make the case for additional support in the future. The other thing that is terribly useful, of course, is how this program or service advances your library's goals, so that it's not just about the specific needs of your target audience, but also about the library's goals, which of course will probably be about advancing the needs or supporting the needs of your target audience. Articulating up front what your success criteria are. One of the things that is really important to think about is that we are careful about success criteria being so heavily focused on numbers that we're not thinking about qualitative criteria. There are probably a lot of qualitative criteria that we could gather, and I'd love it if any of you could share examples of some qualitative measures that you've used. So if you have qualitative metrics that you use, please go ahead and type those in the chat box. That would be wonderful to hear. A lot of times our success criteria, or the things that we keep track of, are the numbers of people who participate, the numbers of surveys that people, the evaluations that people complete, those sorts of things. But there are much more robust criteria. Anyone have some success criteria that are qualitative to share with us? So qualitative services, let's think about this. So qualitative success criteria could be that and you could mix it with quantitative, of course, because of course that will be something that we always value, things that are easy from a numerical point of view to measure. So a quantitative success could be something like 9 out of 10 people who participated in this bibliographic training said that they, feel much more confident in their ability to navigate their research agenda, right? And so you have a quantitative and qualitative metric there that you have you have a 9 out of 10, but you also have the more confident. And you can ask people in the beginning, how confident are they about beginning their research process, or how confident are they about how to go about the appropriate steps for learning about a particular discovery process. At the beginning of you could just do this quickly in an informal way, as a show of hands at the beginning of a session, for example, and then follow it at the end of the session with something that's as simple as a show of hands that say, now how many people are more confident or have increased their confidence. You can also do things like have one-on-one interviews or have focus groups. I'd say one-on-one interviews are really helpful where you have conversations with people about whether or not they are more able now to have interactions in the library that are more substantive. They know who to contact or their point of contact is. They can navigate the library resources. They think that the programs and services that we've offered are more reflective of their culture or their cultural background. We can work with people to develop programs and services where at the end of it, one of the success criteria could be about us strengthening our relationship with a particular cultural community, for example. So one of the success criteria is through this process of developing a particular diversity-related service, we, internal to the library, have gained a stronger working relationship and sense of rapport with a particular cultural constituency that's been important for us to establish a relationship with. And so some of this could be about establishing a relationship or positioning the libraries or the library staff more strategically with certain entities in the community or on campus that we've been meaning to establish relationships with. Anyone? Okay, so the couple of other questions that, what are the tentative time frame, budget, and resource needs, and then being able to measure against those. And then what are the skills internal that team members need? And when I say the skills that team members need, a lot of times that also includes things like relationships or cultural understanding or cross-cultural experience or even language skills, for example. And then in the follow-up to, a diversity program or services, there are some things that we might want to understand and evaluate ourselves against that could be useful as we go forward. What did we learn about scheduling? What did we learn about budget? Sometimes the things that we learn about something as simple as schedule or budget are really important to take into consideration. So for example, sometimes we have programs or services that are intended to reach out to certain audiences, but we hold them at times that are not really conducive for that particular audience, right? And so we really need to understand who our target audience is, what community, what are the norms within a particular cultural community, are there specific times of day, what is the nuclear, if we're trying to reach out, if we're in a community, if we're in a public library setting, what group of people are we trying to reach out to? Are we trying to reach out to children or parents or extended families? So we really need to think about the ways in which different groups may have very different scheduling needs. Linda, I want you to, could you retype that one more time? Doesn't that also include hours of operation? Absolutely includes hours of operation, the times that we're available. And again, we should think about, the communities that we're trying to serve. Are we really clear about who they are and what their patterns and expectations are and how that is consistent or inconsistent with our own infrastructure? And then what can we do to make adjustments? Now, sometimes we don't have a lot of power over things like our hours of operation, at least initially, but there may be some things that we could do differently as far as really trying to reach out to the community, like holding special programs that may be outside of the library, but held in a different building, for example, if we're on a campus or if we're in a public library setting, that can really facilitate us reaching out differently than we might otherwise. But that requires that we really know who our user communities are. Do any of you have specific user communities that you've been trying to reach out to that you're really thinking about? How do we do this? Or how do we know if we're effectively doing this? Linda, I see you're typing. I'm just waiting for you. No pressure here. Anyone? Okay, well, go ahead and chime in when you get the opportunity. But one of the things that's really important here is, and what I'm trying to do is talk kind of high level about evaluation, which is actually, Yolanda Cuestas, it's her area of expertise more than it is mine, but I'm trying to give you some of the nuggets of things that I've dealt with over the course of my career. But the important thing is that there are some things that are really useful to think about at a high level as far as evaluation, as far as program design, and as far as pursuing initiatives and having impact on your organization and your organizational effectiveness. But then related to diversity, it's really important that you think about the very particular community that you're trying to reach out to, and then making sure that your metrics are taking into consideration the unique characteristics of that particular community, because different communities will have very different, will require different thinking about design, delivery, facilitation, and preparation and follow-up. And so that's what I'm encouraging here. So Linda says, our adult programs are very low attendance and the area is blue collar workers, mostly people during the times we are open. And also most people do not know we are separate from the two schools. We, in between, they think we are at the school's library. Yeah, so that is, yeah, fair. So your adults in your community don't know that you are there, that you're a library that's really there to serve the adult population. They think of you as really connected to the schools. And so how is it that you could reach out? What are some of the ways in which you might reach out to adults in your community, right? So that you have information about what would be motivating and incentivizing for them. What are some of the things that you've already done? Have you already done anything, or do other folks have any examples of things that could be useful in Linda's situation to do to reach out to and get specific information with her adult population in this example? Okay, I don't see anyone typing. I'm going to jump in. I don't know if I know the exact answer to this, but this could be a place where something as simple as maybe grocery store flyers. I'm thinking of, blue collar workers. It's not necessarily going to be that you can show up in people's staff meetings necessarily if most people are blue collar workers, but there are probably places in the community that people go to pretty regularly, whether it be churches or grocery stores or convenience stores, coffee shops, where there's opportunities to tell people about specific services offered by the library that could really be customized to some of their specific needs, to customize for some of their specific kinds of needs. So what are the kinds of things that people typically need help with in your community that your library offers, and that could be interesting programming for them. And also might be things, yeah, well, and again, this may be a place where some testing could be done of that, right? So evening hours so that people have access when they're not working, but then thinking about from an evaluation point of view, how do you gather feedback before you just go and expand your library's hours, which is trickier to make the case for up front, especially if it doesn't necessarily result in an influx of people after you've done that, particularly if people already don't necessarily know that you're there separate from the schools. Then how is it that you make people aware of the library and the library's resources, incentivize them to want to use the library's resources, and then get input about whether or not expanding your hours would be useful for them? Is there a way that there could be a focus group or something like that that's done in a community setting that would give you that kind of information and also allow you to share information about the library services? Like Walmart, yep. If we were if we are the only library open every night till 9, it's easy to remember and would be great. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But again, you figuring out how you make the case for that in advance is really important. So is there a focus group opportunity, even at a Walmart, where you go to Walmart and you say, okay, we're going to do informal focus groups or informal data collection where you're giving out information, and maybe you work in coordination with your community Walmart and say, look, we're not selling anything, we're not competing, but we want to be able to tap into some of your servers. Employees would not like it, I think. Well, the tricky part is that strategy and culture have to at some point align, right? And related to anything, it's really important that you lead with strategy. What is it that we're trying to do? What is it that we're trying to become, and what are our aspirations in our organization that are key to us being the value add organization in this community that we say we are, and that will continue to be fundable, right? That will continue to be supported by all of the key stakeholders that we need to support us. And then what are the strategic drivers that we need to put in place and really prioritize in order to keep us in that value add position within our community and with our key stakeholders? And then what are some of the operational sorts of changes that we might need to make in order to align with that? And so again, if there's ever a place where you think we need to do X, making sure, especially if you anticipate some pushback, making sure that you do the due diligence up front to collect the data and to know that what you're doing is in the service of your organizational vision and values, and then using that as making the case for why it is that you're taking a new direction. And then, asking employees to come along with you along the way. But once you have that data, and as long as they're involved in the process and they understand that this is strategic and that this is user driven, then hopefully they will be much more apt to support whatever the new direction is. But in any new direction related to diversity, and that's why I went back, that's why I talk so much about organizational culture along the way. With any new direction related to diversity, whether it's expanding your evening hours in order to be more accessible to blue collar families, or to take on new behaviors, to asking your employees to start taking language skills, right? To start taking Spanish classes, as one of their professional development experiences. Whatever the new behaviors are that are consistent with your organizational vision and values and strategy, that we have to know that this is something that it's going to take a lot of process from the inside for people to understand why this is important, how this connects to our organizational strategy, and what the expectations are of me over time. And it's not just going to be a flip of a light switch where all of a sudden one day we're just going to have expanded hours or being expected to do everything in multiple languages, but there's going to be a process over time where we're going to start to develop new capacity. But we have to start laying that groundwork, and it begins by letting people know that we really value diversity, and this is what that value, this is how we define that value. This is how we define it. And that means that we're talking about race and religion and culture and gender and sexual orientation, and we're talking about socioeconomic status and ability levels and all of those different things. And we need to start there and let that be integral to our identities, organizationally speaking, and then the rest of it needs to trickle down from there. So hang in there, Linda. There's just a process in front of you, but it sounds like there's some good opportunities for exploring. Under the item number 5 or 4 here is measuring diversity and collection development. And what I think is the very most helpful thing I could do here is provide you with a really wonderful link. This link is, and thank you, Linda. This link is to a document. It's a really useful set of slides that was co-authored by Courtney Young, who is the ALA president, and it's about diversity and collection development work. It doesn't say we figured it all out, but it does give some information about the work that's been done at a high level about how we measure diversity in collection development. Basically, what we expect as far as diversity in collection development is that there is a reasonable representation from different minority groups in our collections, that there is reasonable representation from different countries and cultures, that there is a reasonable balance of gender, that there is diversity in the curricular content, and that there is a climate supportive of different minority groups and cultures as we go about our collection development work. And so one of the things that this document also does is go on to describe something that happened back in the 90s at this point, but it goes on to describe and break down the implementation of different diversity codes that correspond with minority and underrepresented groups as defined in the ALA diversity statement, and give a little bit of information about where we are. There's still a lot of work to be done around diversity and collection development, and I know that papers are even coming out now. I've had somebody just last week send me a paper that just got approved for publication on this very topic. So I know that there's a lot that's happening, and a lot of it is institutional, but a lot of information is available at the ALA levels about policies and practices that are happening that are starting to really be models for all of us. But it just requires intentionality. There's a couple of things that are really useful to kind of keep in mind about things like the diversity codes, for example, that they're a provided systematic method to measure diversity. They're relatively easy to use, and there's minimal overhead, but some of the cons are that, you know, it's easy to have inappropriate code assignment. It's dependent on selectors to use during the ordering. It's only used for firm orders, not used for approval plans, gifts, electronic resources, etc. And it's easy to confuse with other coding used for program or international dimensions. So there's still some work to be done. There's still a lot of opportunity, but it is useful to know that there is progress being made in this direction. How do you all address diversity in your collection development and measuring it? So I think from a measurement point of view, especially if you're thinking about a diversity strategic plan, or at least creating some high-level metrics from an evaluative point of view, the areas that I outlined initially might be some of the most useful to think about. And again, I'm just going to state them one more time. There is reasonable representation from different minority groups in our collection. There is reasonable representation of countries and cultures. There's a reasonable balance of gender. There's diversity in our curricular content, and that we, generally speaking, have climate supportive of different minority groups and cultures. And this is outside of the collection development piece specifically, but also about the climate in our organization, which is necessary to anchor all of these. Absolutely, and that the different formats, we have diversity of formats. Absolutely. Thank you, Linda. So from an evaluative point of view, if this isn't something that you typically do, then the other thing that I didn't read off just now because it wasn't in the literature that I looked at in advance, but it makes me think of is that it's also that we need to think about that we have things that are reasonably accessible for people with a variety of different learning styles and ability levels and types of abilities, so that we have things that are available for people who need Braille, or for people who need things available in an auditory form or something like that. So we need to also make sure that we are thinking about ability in our measurement of our collections. diversity strategic plans. Do any of you have diversity strategic plans in your library? Anyone? Linda, it looks like you're typing. If anyone else does. Don't know, probably. Okay. Then, Linda, what library are you at? Tell me what library you're at if you do. So, as you're typing, and anyone jump on in, please. I can keep up with the chat box, no problem. So, it's not. I don't see a lot of diversity strategic plans. Northwest Regional, okay. I don't see a lot of diversity strategic plans in libraries. I see strategic plans that might reference diversity, and oftentimes I see diversity referenced more as a value than as a specific strategic driver or goal, personally. And I do a lot of strategic planning in libraries. But I don't get asked to help with diversity strategic plans specifically. And when I do regular strategic plans, or high-level strategic plans that are organization-wide, diversity comes up, but it usually comes up as part of the value statement, but not necessarily as a main strategic goal. So if you have a diversity strategic plan, you get extra cool points from me, because I think that's very rare. And it says a lot about your organization's values. What I am able to share with you is a little bit about some elements of a diversity strategic plan that might be useful to think about. That there's a link here that gives you an evaluation of a diversity program at an academic library. This is just one particular institution. And it's only an academic institution, but that doesn't matter. So if you're not at an academic library, that shouldn't matter a whole lot, because it's really about the diversity plan that I just wanted to share this with you. The document aims to evaluate the overall effectiveness of the library's diversity plan, and some very interesting data surfaces regarding the culture and workplace climate that led to the design and offering of new programs and services. The diversity strategic plans typically have in them areas where you identify strategic drivers, things that you really want to have as your goals related to diversity. And it could be around the 5 areas that came, or the 4 areas that came before what we're talking about now. So they would probably be around things like recruitment and retention, training, diversity programs and services, and collection development. And then would probably include something along the lines of organizational culture and climate. So if you have a diversity strategic plan, it will likely include a mention of all of the areas that we've touched on today. If you do not have a specific diversity strategic plan, but diversity shows up in your organizational strategic plan, what I'd encourage you to do is think about how broadly it shows up. Is it really focused on recruitment and retention? Or is it really focused on compliance and EEO sorts of things? Or is it really focused on programs and services? And then how is it that all of these things integrate across the organization? Because a lot of what's needed for any diversity strategic plan or any strategic plan goals related to diversity is the overall organizational context for change. That the organization has to be able and willing to demonstrate its value around diversity to the extent that people are willing to take on the behaviors necessary to really exemplify the diversity values. It's all about being able to exemplify the diversity values. The things that typically come up when kind of the rubber meets the road around diversity strategic plans are organizational culture and climate. This is the one that comes up the most often, and so this is what I want to end us with today. And I'm going to share a specific tool that many of you are probably already familiar with. Have any of you already used ClimateQual in your organization? Anybody already used ClimateQual? So Climate Qual is an organizational climate assessment that measures library staff perceptions. Okay, so it's an internal climate assessment. I'm sure you're familiar with LibQual, right, which is an external assessment. It's a satisfaction indicator of our users, and it asks our users, to what degree are you satisfied with your experience of the library related to XYZ, whether it's space or accessing materials or staff, availability and accessibility, etc. That's the external. Climate Qual is the kind of sister instrument that really focuses on the internal capacity of the organization. And it's designed specifically around 3 areas: the library's commitment to the principles of diversity, organizational policies and procedures, and staff attitudes. And it is a very popular instrument that is available in languages, many different languages, and has been used around the world, as LibQual has. So it's not the only climate assessment. Most institutions actually create kind of homegrown instruments, but Climate Qual is one that was created specifically for the library community to assess our internal climate related to diversity and staff engagement and attitudes. So the scales on Climate Qual are organizational climate for justice, organizational climate for leadership, organizational climate for deep diversity, climate for demographic diversity, climate for innovation, as in working with coworkers. And so innovation implies that there's an ability to take advantage of the synergistic exchange that comes when coworkers with different backgrounds and experience and perceptions and cultural lenses come together and create something more special or unique or innovative than any of us could have created on our own. Climate for continual learning, climate for teamwork, climate for customer service, and climate for psychological safety. It's a pretty robust tool. It's been very well vetted and researched. It came from the work of a professor at the University of Maryland, Paul Hanges, and a more national level survey that he created that had been applied in a lot of different industries. And then the Association of Research Libraries worked with him to create Climate Qual specifically for libraries. However, it started with one particular institution that was the model library. And the model in this case was University of Maryland at College Park. Paul Hanges, the professor who created the instrument, is a professor at University of Maryland and coupled with the University of Maryland College Park Library in order to test this model and then think about application for the creation of a more general tool for the library community. Okay, and so what they first needed to do is answer the question, why is it important to evaluate internal customer satisfaction? And I'm quoting here Charles Lowry. The most important finding of our research is the connection between the health of an organization and the climate for services that it produces. And he went on to, in his work, who's the director of the libraries and then became the director of the Association of Research Libraries, to find a direct and strong positive correlation between LibQual survey results, that is external user satisfaction, and Climate Qual, positive Climate Qual, internal user satisfaction. That when your internal organization is healthy and has a strong sense of justice and strong sense of valuing diversity, then the probability of your external users having a higher degree of satisfaction increases significantly. So happy employees who feel heard, respected, valued are able and willing to produce higher quality experiences for our external users. And so just a little bit about what they found at the University of Maryland, just to give you an example, because there are a lot of different organizations that have used Climate Qual, and you can learn more about Climate Qual, but I want to give you an example of how you take the results of an assessment like this, an internal climate assessment, and use it to create transformative changes. So these are some of the results that are taken from a presentation that was shared at the ACRL conference in 2014. So what they found, they initially piloted this in 2000. What they found is that there were issues that surfaced, that people said that their managers needed training. Now, when they asked about, and you saw the things they asked about, justice, diversity, et cetera, policies, procedures, and what they found was that they needed more managerial training. People needed to understand how to do more effective coaching, professional development, helping people master the skills associated either with their job or their changing roles and responsibilities, mentoring, helping people understand how to work more effectively in this organizational culture, etc. Standardization of procedures, because what happens a lot of times in different organizations, and that often feels or is described as inequitable, is that one manager may say, this is the way things work around here, and another manager may have a very different way of handling a very similar circumstance in another department. And so the standardization of procedures and the way that managers go about giving feedback and holding accountable employees across departments created a sense of fairness and equity. And decision-making practices, though that was huge. And that not just was huge then, but it's huge across many libraries. So how decisions are made. And I would say that this decision-making practices has a lot to it, not just how are we making decisions and are we being transparent and are we being inclusive to the extent that we can and should be inclusive, but also are we sharing criteria for how we're making decisions, and are we taking into consideration things like implicit and or unconscious bias as we are going through our decision-making processes? To what extent is our diversity awareness and cultural lenses impacting the way that we make decisions? So that's really important to think about, implicit bias and how those things play into decision-making practices. And as part of this diversity series, we'll talk more about that. Recruitment and selection of ethnic minorities. A lot of times people said that we're not selecting people because we're not doing enough to create the very diverse pools that we probably have access to if we think differently about the way that we're writing our position descriptions, the way that we're preparing and facilitating our search committees, and the way that we are organizing our organizational structure. Performance reviews. This is really important, and again, I cannot underscore how this plays itself out in real life situations. So I've been a consultant in the library community for just over 20 years now, and I have gone in at least a dozen times in academic settings, it always happened to be in academic settings, and done some sort of mediation where an African American, it always happened to be African American, where an African American librarian did not get continuing appointment or tenure, and I was asked to come in to help to mediate the situation because the person was given feedback that he or she wasn't given continuing appointment and or tenure because they were too aggressive or abrasive, I'm using air quotes, or confrontational. And a lot of times, I'm going back to the implicit bias message that I just mentioned, a lot of times those same folks would say, wait a minute, I have colleagues around me who are pretty assertive, who are pretty outspoken, who are pretty strong-willed, and they got tenure, or because their research agenda hasn't been broad enough or scholarly enough because they've been doing research and writing and presentations on diversity as a subject area rather than something that the institution considered more scholarly. And so it's pretty interesting to think about, how diversity shows itself in policies and procedures that we don't necessarily think about, and how important it is for us to always have our diversity lenses on as we're thinking about all of these things. And then rewards and recognition, of course. And then what they did, because this is the really important part, not just what we found, but what we did at the University of Maryland. What they did was they started to do some more transformative kind of changes. So they started holding all staff meetings. They started putting a lot more heavy emphasis on learning and creating a very robust professional development and training program that was ongoing. Creating a specific training for supervisors that was ongoing and had created deep learning metrics around it. They created new positions, and then they focused a lot on team building. And that's just some of the things that they did. And then over the course of 2 or 3 years, they started really working on these transformative changes, and then they repeated the instrument again, maybe 3 years later, in order to get a sense of how much they have moved the needle as far as their findings. I'm sharing this with you because it's really useful. Okay, so I'm sorry, 2004, they went back and redid the survey again. They found the results that are listed here on the left-hand side of your screen. And then what they did were, figure out what are the transformational changes that we need to put in place in order to keep moving. What they did not do was hide their results. They instead took their results and said, okay, now what does this mean for us as far as development opportunities? And then how are we going to share with people what we're going to do differently and how we'll measure our success? And then they did incremental measurements along the way. They kind of tested the waters, but they gave themselves a full 4 years to do the climate qual survey again, because doing something that's a large organizational climate assessment annually is just too much. You can't really expect a significant change to occur in that period of time. And what you really want is people to really be focused on actively experiencing and participating in the change processes that are going to lead to more affirmative results in the future. So this is just an example of how it is that they mapped that out, and I'm just sharing this with you as an example so that you'll know that this is a more robust way to go about diversity evaluation, but it really can be very substantive, and it ties in an integral way to the work of the organization. This is not only about diversity, but it's also about all of the other pieces of the organizational culture and strategy and structure that will make the diversity efforts strong and robust and central. And so I'm going to end here with some of the things that they shared in their presentation as far as their process. That all of this is really about community building, that everything related to diversity programs and evaluation and initiatives and moving forward is all really about community building, and knowing that there's no one-size-fits-all method of interpreting results or implementing changes, that you really have to think about what is institutionally appropriate and what is appropriate given your target audience, and that implementing changes really has to work with your organizational culture and with your resources. That you want to try to create an intimate community of participants, that you really want people to feel a sense of ownership in not just the input but the outcome, and help you identify success metrics that are valuable to them at the outset of your planning process so that they can be co-conspirators with you in helping you to be successful during the evaluation phase. That in-person events and online shared workspaces and in-person conversations are all experiences that could be enriching ways to engage people. And then you also want to make sure that you not just evaluate, but you allow for shared experience concerning improvement strategies. What can we do in the future that is different, better, and building upon what we've done just now together? So that's it for me, and we are at the 12:30 mark. Any comments or questions? Well, the biggest thing that I want to do is thank all of you. I know that our initial presenter wasn't able to be here today, and she's the consummate expert on this. So I appreciate your working with me along the way and sharing your ideas. And thank you all so much. I've really enjoyed our time together today. And thank you, Sweflin, for inviting me.
And thank you, Dieta, for picking up this webinar and doing a great job. We were very lucky to have been able to participate in this learning opportunity. Some great information and a sneak peek of what is coming up. Attendees, be sure to sign up for our Access and Community Engagement webinar on Thursday, March 3rd. The next webinar of Swiflin's Diversity Discovery Institute Year 2, R is for Relationships, on Friday, March 4th. The next webinar of Swiflin's DigiRef Academy, Part 5, Resources for the Law and Legal Questions, on Thursday, March 10th. And the next webinar of Handling the Storm of an Angry Customer, O is for Ownership, on Friday, March 18th. We encourage you to look at the upcoming webinars and workshops in months ahead, and hope you're all able to join us for future training opportunities. So thank you and have a wonderful weekend. And thank you, Jeanette, for a wonderful job as always.
Thank you, guys.